The world is complex, the Bible is complex. Human existence is a tangled ball of experience, perception, and understanding. Ravel is a puzzling word, denoting both a tangling and untangling. This podcast attempts to hold honest conversations in good faith. Some ideas expressed in this podcast will be challenging. Others will be obvious. When a PhD in biblical interpretation and a habitually podcasting man-child discuss matters of society, scripture, and scandal, you get Ravel.
Hey everybody, you are listening to Ravel, and it's me, your best buddy Basil. And with me, the delightful, the insightful, the foresightful Dr. Christopher Ryan Gates.
That was good. That was really good. Ooh, spooky. Yeah.
Such foresight you have there,
yes.
Christopher.
Yeah. It is interesting that you say it like that. We were actually talking just last night in my systematic theology class there at the college, and we were talking about prophecy and what the word means and how there's a distinction between forthtelling and telling forth. Both of those can be considered prophecy in biblical speak, but forthtelling would be kind of the, predicting of future events and things like that, whereas, telling forth or speaking forth, that can simply just be receiving a word from God for a group of people and then giving it to them. Doesn't necessarily have to be about the future, but prophecy, sometimes God gives a word and it is about the future, and that is a prophetic word, but prophetic words also can be for the here and now. So yes, I don't know that I have ever actually had an event in my life where I have received any kind of word from the Lord about a future event that may happen and given that to anybody, but I've probably been, accidentally right about a few things from time to time.
Well, that is an interesting rant that you just went on there, because those types of distinctions are going to be very important to today's episode.
Yeah.
As we, this was a topic that we threw out a while back as we were just sort of listing things we might be interested in talking about on the show and exploring more. But the more I started looking into it and digging deeper and trying to understand the situation a little bit better, the distinctions upon distinctions upon distinctions became so overwhelming. I now understand why, whole generations of Christian thought and tradition simply just lump it all into one little box and just throw it into the ocean and never talk about it again.
Yeah. What is the box called? What do you call the
and
box?
Indeed, the box. And even finding a correct distinction for the box, the correct title for the box, is difficult. Originally, what was on our list was sorcery and scrying in the Bible.
Yeah.
And then that got pared down to just scrying, because the topic is too wide and too broad to fit into one episode. So we cut it down to scrying. And then even scrying was not, it just wasn't correct, because the official definitions of scrying, I thought scrying was just sort of like anything to try to divine, the will of God, or to tell the future, get some sort of supernatural insight into the world. But no, of course, those heathens over at Merriam-Webster's did not give me the leeway I was looking for. Apparently, scrying is very specific to crystal balls, looking into the crystal balls, which is a weird way to say that now here on the show. But so scrying doesn't work. I finally pared it down to what we are going to be focusing on today, which is Claromancy.
Okay.
Have you heard this term? You seen this? You heard about this?
Yeah, but please give us a definition. Tell me about it.
Okay, so claromancy specifically is a form of sortition, casting of lots, in which an outcome is determined by means that normally would be considered random, such as rolling of dice, but are sometimes believed to reveal the will of God or other universal forces and entities. And that is thanks to the very devoted editors over there at Wikipedia. That is the Wikipedia rundown of claromancy.
Okay.
And the reason I pared this down is because, first of all, let's get back to the distinctions. Okay, so we're talking about, trying to reveal the will of God in one way or another. And of course, biblically, there's a few different ways to do that. One of them, like you mentioned earlier, was prophecy. And prophecy apparently has complicated distinctions, as you told us about. And I will say a lot of these things, they kind of break down, like for instance, the prophecy discussion. These break down pretty significantly along denominational lines. What was kind of the vibe that you were getting in your class there?
Well, I mean, most of the time, and we had talked about this in the last episode, it's one of those, the supernatural gifts, the spiritual gifts, they come up in conversation a lot, and I find that most people are open to it. It's very seldom that you run into people who are cessationist, those people who believe that all of the works of the Holy Spirit, the supernatural works in the church, healing and prophecy in a certain sense, and all of those, that they ceased. There are very few people who believe just hardcore that all of those ceased. There are, most people kind of believe that they still continue, but it's in kind of a limited fashion and things like that. So as we were talking, tongues, I think, was what we were talking about specifically in the last episode. But as we were talking about prophecy last night, it is something where most people are pretty open to it. And I believe I had mentioned in, just an episode or two or a few ago, where I have had encounters with people who are strangers to me and have spoken into my life, these very specific details about things where they're getting some kind of revelation from God, and they are giving a word to me specifically. And I'm using these as, examples that I can speak personally about, where I say, I don't know you. How are you speaking about this particular situation that's going on in my life? And they're giving me a word from the Lord. And I would call that a prophetic word. That is a word coming from God to me, but it doesn't have anything to do with the future. There are, and I don't know that I see this very, very often. It's kind of general when it happens in the church anymore. People have these kind of general visions about the Lord is calling this church to growth, or he's calling you to, step into a new season or something.
It's almost just like some, just some generally good advice and positive words,
right?
Sometimes, which is not necessarily not prophecy, but also not what most people think of when they think of prophecy.
Yeah. Well, so the Bible teaches about prophecy. Paul, when he's talking about the spiritual gifts in 1 Corinthians, he says that of all the spiritual gifts, we should desire prophecy. That should be the one that we all want, and that should be the one that we're all asking God for in our lives, is prophecy. It is one that I have asked him for, and I don't understand it to be, I don't want to be able to tell the future. That's not how I'm thinking about prophecy, but I want to have words to encourage others and to direct others. And, if I'm willing to be a vessel that God will use.
Words of encouragement and things coming from God will be better than just you, Chris, telling somebody that they look nice today.
Exactly. So that is generally, and then of course in my Baptist background, which I'm not chained to or anything like that, but in the Baptist kind of world, they understand prophecy usually because it's in the Bible. You can't say it doesn't exist, so we have to do something with it in the Baptist church. And most of the time, the Baptist churches see it as something akin to preaching. The preacher studies and prepares, and God gives him a word, and he shares the word with the church. And that's kind of where they leave prophecy. I think it goes deeper and more specific than that. And I have experienced it before, and I know that there are people who operate in the prophetic, and that's getting a little more in the charismatic world. They're like, oh, yeah, of course. Mm-hmm. You say that in the Baptist world, and they're like, what do you mean operate in? What does that mean? Are we talking about offices here and all of that stuff?
Yes, we're talking about the office of the prophet or the gift of prophecy.
Right.
Two different things. Yeah, I obviously, having come up in the charismatic Pentecostal sort of stream there, could go off on all sorts of prophecy-related things, but that's not what we're talking about here, Chris.
Yeah, back to the point.
But we were talking about prophecy to mention how we are not talking about prophecy, because that is a different thing. Hearing directly from the Lord through assistance of the Holy Spirit and things like that. That's a very different thing than Claromancy.
Yes.
With now, here's the thing. Why am I interested in Claromancy?
This is a good question. This has been something you've been really excited to get to. So
well, it's something that I'm excited to explore because here's the thing. When it comes to something like Claromancy, automatic, your pastor is going to say it's the devil. Don't do it. Don't do anything. I had a youth pastor at one point who would discourage just flipping coins, because it was considered a type of, I don't know, he considered it a type of scrying or something like that. Now, of course, that's not a normal response to your youth group trying to flip coins to see, what they're supposed to do or something. It was actually on a missions trip, now that I think about it. Oh, story time. We were on a missions trip, and there was two choices about where we could go that day, and we were trying to, and the thing was, okay, everybody go to your own little private zone, go to a quiet place, and let's pray, and let's ask God where we should go. Should we go? And it's just, like, we'll go down to the market, or go over to this, I don't know, orphanage or something. Like, where were we going to minister that day? And so we all went off and we prayed, and everybody came back, and it was an even split between the market and
the orphanage.
An even split between the market and the orphanage. I don't think it was an orphanage. I think it was a school. And so somebody suggested, just like, okay, let's flip a coin. And that was unacceptable. That was considered some sort of, scrying or sorcery, that we would not leave this decision up to flipping a coin. We are going to let the Lord decide.
Fascinating.
And ever since then, it was only shortly after that I realized that basically flipping coins was a pretty legit way all throughout the Bible of deciphering the will of God.
Yeah.
So that's where this comes from, a lifelong interest in, the biblical concept of flipping coins to determine what God wants you to do. All right, don't get triggered, everybody. We're going to go through this together. So, some examples, just so everybody knows that this is a thing. Of course, we have the concept of casting lots, okay? Yes. We know this very sort of biblical term. Just to read a little brief review here for you. Casting lots was a method used by the Jews of the Old Testament and by the Christian disciples prior to Pentecost to determine the will of God. Lots could be sticks with markings, stones with symbols, etc., which were thrown into a small area, and then the result was interpreted. Quote, this is Proverbs 16:33, "The lot is cast into the lap, but its every decision is from the Lord." There are many instances of casting lots in the Bible. In the Bible, the practice was used in a variety of circumstances, including the selection of the scapegoat in Leviticus 16:8-10, the allocation of the tribal inheritance in the Promised Land. That was in Numbers and in Joshua. I'm reading from a Jewish source here, by the way. The determination of the families who had to relocate to give proper distribution of the populace, or of those warriors who had to go to war where only a percentage was required, such as in Nehemiah when they had to repopulate Jerusalem. The order of the priests and their duties were decided by casting lots. This is in First Chronicles and Nehemiah. And the determination of an offender in Joshua and Proverbs. So all sorts of things. Yeah. Lots were being cast all over the place. And that's, in the Old Testament and the New Testament. In Leviticus, Aaron cast the lots for the scapegoat and the sacrifice. In Acts, of course, we have lots, not in Acts, but before Acts, we have lots being cast, sort of most famously in Matthew, the Roman guards who crucified Jesus cast lots for his garments. Now that's not necessarily, the righteous casting lots, but it's happening there. But then in Acts, the disciples drew lots and determined to replace the now deceased Judas with Matthias, using this lot system. So lots are being cast all over the place. People are flipping coins and throwing sticks and rocks and things and it's usually in a decision-making, situation. Yeah. And this points out the one distinction that I want to make in that, let me pull up. Sorry, I have a whole bunch of sources pulled up here, so you'll hear me clicking. I've got about like 30 tabs full of stuff that I'm going to read from.
Attaboy.
Yeah. So, of course, the Bible also is very clear about, restricting sorcery or fortune telling or things like that. In Leviticus, you shall not eat any flesh with blood in it. You shall not interpret omens or tell fortunes. Do not turn to mediums or necromancers. Isaiah. And when they say to you, inquire of the mediums and necromancers who chirp and mutter, should not the people inquire of their God? Inquire of the dead. Should they inquire of the dead on behalf of the living? So, and then, of course, in Deuteronomy, all over the place, saying, don't do the bad things, do the good things. So I had to find this distinction between interpreting omens or telling fortunes, specifically. I think those relate to the casting lots a little bit more than necromancy or mediums. Now, again, there may be some people out there immediately triggered, as I was, as many are, because of the church and sort of Christian tradition altogether, pretty much tossing out literally everything that has to do with not directly getting answers from God. So using any sort of like physical, earthly mechanism to determine the will of God is all kind of lumped together with, bad stuff, demons or the devil or powers of darkness, things like that. And that's not to say that some of them aren't. Obviously, we're talking necromancy, we're talking mediums, we're talking all sorts of stuff, all getting lumped together, usually under sort of the modern label of the occult. They'll sort of equate this kind of stuff with tarot cards or blah, blah, blah. Are you following so far?
Oh, I'm with you. Yes, I'm
okay.
Engaged. I'm right here.
Okay, good. So that's the part of what I'm trying to do here, and part of what I've been interested in doing for a very long time is, look, I get it. We've all gotten the we've all gotten the memo that, like I said, all these things get thrown into the box and hurled into the ocean, never to be seen again. But when we talk about casting lots, it's a little bit more complicated because of the biblical references, not just by the unrighteous, but also by the extremely righteous and the disciples, and both the Old Testament, patriarchs and the New Testament disciples. Everybody's casting lots. So what is it? What is these casting lots? Well, I don't think in the context of these biblical references, it's always to make a decision. There's always a decision between one thing or another. And it's not necessarily used to tell a fortune or, do something like that. It's not fortune telling. It's not telling the future. It's not, something of that category. It's simply like, hey, we can't make a decision. Let's just flip a coin, and whatever the coin says, well, that's what we'll do. That's what God wants. Does that trigger you?
No, it doesn't trigger me.
Okay, good.
It is funny though, because I remember as a kid, I've never had anyone go so far as to say that flipping a coin is.
That was a special case. I don't want to lay a precedent there,
but I mean, still.
That is what triggered my interest that now, 20 years later, I cannot. I have to do a podcast about it.
Yeah. I mean, you can see, I try to be generous and gracious with people, and I could almost see how a person, if they're trying to do their very best to follow the Lord and hear from the Lord, might say, that's some kind of, giving up, or not necessarily that. I don't think they would have accused anyone of consorting with demons, but just to say we're not going to leave this up to chance. It is interesting, though, how anytime the topic comes up of casting of lots, I always think of Proverbs 16:33, which you already cited, that the lot is cast into the lap, but it's every decision is from the Lord. So it is interesting that, it's a way that God determined that he would make his will known among people. And you assume that while it seems like this kind of matter of chance, that he actually does have his hand in it. That's one. I'm going to come back to that in just a second. But when I was a kid, I remember the Magic 8 Balls. You remember the Magic 8 Ball? Of course you do.
Oh, yeah.
That was a bit controversial. And
there are some little demons hanging out in that little blue swimming pool.
Did each one come with its own demon who, turned the little triangular die whichever way he wanted? But I remember, some controversy that surrounded that, and that kind of just gives more kind of testimony to what you were saying, that there is sometimes in the Christian community we get a little we overreact, I think, sometimes to things, and something might be trivial or just kind of fun, and then it has a tie somewhere. You can see how the Magic 8 Ball is almost like looking into a crystal ball or something like that, and there may be somebody trying to trivialize something that actually is very dangerous with, some toy. And then you even have things like Ouija boards and things like that too, which then you're getting a little more into like, that
would be more of the mediumship type of thing, or the necromancy, where the goal is to make contact with some spiritual entity versus, let a dice decide a decision or something. Right.
But all of them, because they have some kind of tie, and they even, the Ouija board, there was at least a time period where they were advertising it to children. It's like a kid's game, and you could get them at Toys R Us. So it's like
you still can. I was doing some Christmas shopping, and Ouija boards are still at Target.
Yeah, that's not really surprising these days. But I understand. I think sometimes the compulsion from Christian moms and dads to just say, it's you don't need that. Stay away from it. Your life's not going to be any worse because you don't have a Magic 8 Ball. Let's just leave it alone. So I can understand that.
And it is complicated. Like one of my biggest points here for this whole thing is that it is so much more complicated. It's so much easier to just say, don't bother.
Yeah.
Just put it with the tarot cards and throw it into the fire.
Yeah, I mean, with all the things, that people have, going on in their lives and everything, it's, you just kind of, you do a triage, it's a quick assessment. You look at the thing, it's questionable. You don't need it. Let's go. Let's keep moving, kind of thing. But, if it was something a little more important, I would hope that, parents would take the time to kind of look into it and see, is this harmful? Is this okay? And I think there's a lot of content that's coming out, Harry Potter, of course, a huge, controversy. I don't know if it even is a controversy. Most of the Christians and families I know, nobody has a problem with it, but there are people,
It's settled down now, but certainly in the early days, it was quite the controversy.
Yeah, and then you have to, as a parent or a spiritual leader, you have to look into those things and explore and see where is this? And as you had said, and as we're seeing right now, it can go 100 different directions, but in the, more directly when it's coming to cleromancy, as you're talking about, and these kinds of what seem like instances of chance, but sometimes prescribed by God, he is involving himself in them. And that really, I think, the theological sort of aspect to it when we're looking at the casting of lots. And I would say anytime in the Bible that the Lord says people should cast lots, as it says in Proverbs 16:33, he is determining the way that the sticks or the stones fall, and he is determining the outcome. And that, for me, when I think about this discussion, is where it gets really interesting, because I think everything that we see in life that we look at as random, is it actually the hand of God behind that? Like, as it would be in this thing that seems random, you take a bunch of stones and throw them up in the air, and no one has any idea how they're going to land except for God. Not only does he know how they're going to land, but it seems that he may actually control how they land in order to, provide an outcome if we're going to be interpreting the way that they land. So he actually controls what seems to be very random. Then I'm left to wonder how much other in life that is random does he control? Is there anything that is actually truly random at all? And that's kind of where my mind goes with the whole thing. But I don't want to take it too far away from the main point. But I'm thinking about it, that's always what I'm thinking. How much does anything happen? Just by chance? It's very interesting, and I won't belabor this point, but in the Hebrew language, there is actually no word for coincidence or something that might happen by chance. That's not to say necessarily just because they didn't have a word for it. This came up in one of my seminars one time. It turned into a pretty hot discussion. Someone was saying they didn't believe in chance, and even as they were casting lots, they didn't think it was by chance. They believed that the Lord was going to control it, and it was actually an act of faith, not an act of just leaving stuff up to some kind of random outcome. But the idea was, just because they didn't have a word for chance or coincidence doesn't mean that they didn't actually have a conception of that thing. But it's another interesting kind of discussion. But yes, I don't know, how much God controls. I tend to believe he is in control of every single thing, and actually kind of everything bends to his will one way or the other.
Like, how could it not?
But then you're getting way off into the Calvinist Reformed. When it comes to soteriology, people are going to get really,
Yes. Then why does a loving God let bad things happen if he is indeed in control?
But if he's causing all things to work together for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purpose, if all things are working together for good, then nothing bad ever actually happens, because in the end, it's all going to be good. So it could go, a bunch of different ways, but...
But then what about free will, Christopher?
Yes, what about it indeed?
What about free will?
Does it exist?
Yells the Calvinist from the wings with the beard and the IPA. I love those guys. Okay, let's continue. A lot of things you've brought up here we're going to return to. But I do want to give one more prime example of casting lots in the Bible to just give a little bit more of a foundation that this isn't, coming out of nowhere. So we talked about casting lots in sort of the layman's terms, the layman's use of casting lots. But there are also something called the Urim and the Thummim. You know what these are, correct?
No, I don't.
You don't know the Urim and the Thummim?
No, please tell me.
Oh my gosh, I'm going to
Teach me.
Dr. Christopher
Hey,
Ryan
there's
Gates
always stuff we can learn, right? I'm always
about
learning.
the Urim and the Thummim.
Let's go.
Okay, so I'm going to just read this because I'm reading this from jewishvirtuallibrary.org. The Urim and the Thummim was a priestly device for obtaining oracles. On the high priest's ephod, an apron-like garment, lay a breastpiece, a pouch inlaid with 12 precious stones engraved with the names of the 12 tribes of Israel. That held the Urim and the Thummim. So this is a bit of a thing that some people get a little mixed up. So you have the breastplate of the high priest.
Yes, that I'm
has a bunch
familiar
of,
with, yeah.
Yes. Some people think that is the Urim and the Thummim. That is not the Urim and the Thummim. That contains the Urim and the Thummim. So there's a little pouch in that breastplate that carries the Urim and the Thummim. By means of the Urim, the priest inquires of Yahweh on behalf of the ruler. They were one of the 3 legitimate means of obtaining oracles in early Israel. Owing to the oracular character of the Urim, the breastpiece is called the Breastpiece of Decision. Ooh. The right to work this oracle was reserved for the Levitical priests. Occasionally, the term, and then it goes into some other stuff. So, you have the Urim and the Thummim contained in a pouch on the breastpiece of decision on the Levitical priests. And information is rather slight when it comes to what exactly the Ummim and the Thummim were. There were 2 items. Some think that they were sticks, possibly with some inscriptions on them. Some think they were stones, maybe one black, one white. Some think that some think that they were sort of inscribed with Jewish characters, or with Hebrew characters rather, that would glow when a certain answer was being decided. So there's sort of a range of ideas about what these exactly were, in light of the fact that there's actually very little information about what the actual objects were. Some postulate that they were used in conjunction with the 12 stones that were on the breastplate, and some think, that they were just kept there to be close to the high priest's heart, in sort of either a symbolic or a supernatural closeness to connect the heart of the high priest with the heart of God. Now, let me find this other thing. So Urim translates to lights, and Thummim translates to perfections. There's also some, scholarly debate that one is sort of meant to represent light, one is supposed to represent dark. But this is all sort of scholarly arguing about the details, because there are not really that much details. But the long story short is you have the high priests, the Levitical priests of ancient Israel, constantly kept with them at all times a cleromancy device. And this was used for very important decisions. So it's a whole thing, and some pretty big decisions. I mean, they would decide whether or not to go to war based on, this cleromancy. They would decide, criminal cases. They would decide inheritance cases. They would decide, transfers of power and distribution of land and things, all from this cleromancy done by the high priest. Now, of course, the high priest, being a little bit more of a position to operate some high-tech cleromancy device connected to the will of God, or at least that was the thought. But the point is that this was this was an established, legitimate, spiritual claromancy practice in ancient Israel. Now, there are also discussions about like when they stopped using it, things like that. But really, again, the scholarly explanation on these is pretty weak. They basically just will name the last moment that it was written that they used it, and then just be like, oh, they must have stopped doing it because they don't write about it ever again. So whether or not that's the case, we don't know. So this casting of lots, but it basically equated to casting of lots. And there's a couple of things about casting of lots. So, we might be tempted, somebody out there might be tempted to think, oh, Basil's just saying you can just roll a dice and God will control it. And that's how, we can just blah, blah, blah. That's not what I'm saying. There's some interesting sort of study into the casting of lots with some biblical backup here. There's a couple ways that casting lots in the Bible were sort of explained, or some scholars have tried to categorize the different instances of casting lots. There's, of course, to reveal God's will, which we've talked about a few times. But then there's a commonly neglected purpose for casting lots, and that was to exercise humility. And this was brought up in Proverbs 18:18. Proverbs 18:18 says, casting the lot settles disputes and keeps strong opponents apart. So it was this interesting reference. And it's the context of this, it's Proverbs, so it's just sort of dispensing wisdom. In this section, it's talking about things like, in a lawsuit, the first to speak seems right until someone comes forward and cross-examines. Casting the lot settles disputes and keeps strong opponents apart. A brother wronged is more unyielding than a fortified city. Disputes are like the barred gates of a citadel. So again, it's in sort of this context of decision-making.
Yeah.
And Proverbs 18:18, casting the lot settles disputes and keeps the strong opponents apart, has this very interesting, the idea that casting the lots is displaying the will of God in a decision to be made is a strong one. It's if you're living in a culture, like we don't obviously live in this culture, but if we lived in a culture where flipping a coin was seen as the unquestionable will of God, then it doesn't matter how brutal a discussion or a decision or a disagreement or something is, if it is unquestionably considered the will of God, then it's supposed to have this finality to it that cannot be appealed or repealed. So, it's sort of in that sense, it's a bit of like a social order keeping device, which I think is what Proverbs here is trying to say. Because if you lose the coin flip, if you lose the casting of the lots, there is no, it's not a failure on your part, or it's not a victory on your part. It is simply a decision being made by God. So it's, they talk about it being an exercise in humility. And this even sort of trickled down to the priests who were in charge of casting these lots, or even the kings, the rulers at the time, whether they were given, like for instance, if they cast lots to go to war or not go to war, it was seen as a definitive decision by God. And whether victory came or failure came, it kind of gave the king a little bit of an out, that the will of God had been done, as was seen by the result of the casting of lots. I just thought that was an interesting aspect of the whole idea, whether or not the casting lots does have a direct supernatural connection to the will of God. It has an interesting structure to it, as Peter Rollins would say, or something. Does that bring to mind anything for you?
I mean, you've certainly brought up a lot more in your talk here than I've ever really considered about the matter. I've certainly thought about it before, most often in the context of choosing the new disciple, and Jonah in particular was another one. I don't know that you mentioned Jonah, but I always wonder.
Another great example of seemingly God's will being played out through casting of lots.
Yeah. And there is, as you were talking about too, settling some of the legal disputes and things like that, where that was prescribed by God. So I have considered those, and generally speaking, I've always just assumed that, if the Lord has given a prescription, especially in the, Levitical law, for these things to happen, then I'm certain that he's superintending all of them. You have other instances too, and I think where you're going with all of this, I think where it's going is, kind of the practical application anymore for the believer, or, is that something that we should rely on? We should trust God in. I think this is where it's going. But there, as it became a practice, and as you were talking about, even like with the Romans, casting lots for Jesus' garments, and it was something that happened, all the time in the ancient world. I guess my thoughts are still going back to, I just wonder how much involvement, at what time does God ever let, the pieces fall in a way that he has not superintended? So it is very interesting. It is a interesting consideration to think that they would, allow such huge decisions to be left to a thing that is presumably chance. But I guess you go back again, and it wasn't chance. They didn't believe that it was chance. And I think, as you said, the finality of these decisions, you believe you're coming to the Lord saying, you've told us to do this, and we're believing, and this is the way that you're going to make your will known for whatever reason. You don't want to give anybody a vision. Nobody's getting a dream. You're not going to come down and speak a word to anybody. We're going to toss these sticks in someone's lap and see how they land, and then boom, there you go, and that's it. It's strange, and I wish that I had more to kind of contribute to it, but
no,
I don't.
Well, I think you make. I think the concepts that you've been discussing actually connected a dot or two for me, because there is the one side of the thought, which is there any random act of, we'll just say, the laws of physics, that are not ordained by God? We'll consider rolling dice. The randomness of what comes out from that dice. We'll start with connecting that to some sort of established law of physics or something, right? And then it goes, well, is there an established law of physics that is not known and ordained by God directly?
Right.
Probably not. No. I don't think so.
No.
I think God was very involved with
absolutely
with laws of physics and things like that. And so, therefore, the casting of lot is in some way directly connected with the will of the Lord. And so, in a time where somebody is earnestly looking for an answer from God in a decision, earnestly, authentically lamenting the lack of, audible answer from the Lord on a very important decision, it does not seem that crazy to employ the mechanism. It's almost like a mechanism of God's will through the physical world. Does that make sense? It's like if you're not getting a direct answer, I'm not saying it's the right thing to do or endorsing this. I'm just saying it would make sense if you are desperate enough to hear from God and you are not hearing directly from God, that you could employ a mechanism that is in some way connected to the will of God, such as, laws of physics, where the will of God is wrapped up in physics. And so if you just find a way to interact with physics, then in some, sort of connect the dots type of way, you are inherently interacting with the will of God.
Yeah.
I could see how someone desperate enough would find that a suitable option.
Yeah, well, it's bringing to mind for those who might be thinking this is maybe a little bit you're going a little too far, but when you're talking about chance and whether or not anything is actually up to chance, and as you were giving that last kind of explanation, kind of what came to my mind was those stories that we hear all the time. Everybody's probably got one somewhere where they're like, I was on my way to work this morning and wouldn't you know, I forgot my keys or my purse or whatever, and I had to go back into the house and get them, and then I came back out and I was driving to work, and then I get to the first traffic light, and I stopped and someone blows through the red light right in front of me, and if I hadn't forgot my keys, then I would have been hit by that car, and It was God saved me in that instance. And then the question is, how did God save you in that instance? Did he cause you to forget your keys? Did he like come into your brain and make you forget them? And I'm not saying that wasn't. I believe that God's will is done all throughout the earth, all over the place, even when it's very hard for us to wrap our minds around and receive. But we have these sorts of ideas and these things where all of these instances that are in our lives that can be presumably left up to chance, we think that at times God intervenes somehow supernaturally, or, whatever it is. If you didn't forget your keys, my car didn't start, and then I was 5 minutes late, but because I was 5 minutes late, I missed this horrible accident, or whatever. We've all heard stories. So we're saying that somehow or another, we're believing God is involved in that, and he's causing our car not to start. He's causing us to forget our keys. He's causing us to, have our heel break on the way out the door, or whatever the thing is, and everybody's perfectly okay with that. Then perhaps somebody starts to have a problem when you put it in the context of we rolled the dice to see what would happen. I am not an advocate, really, ever, of people continuing to do that. And you had mentioned, and I think that there may be something to the fact that you don't see any lot casting after. Very notably, it's to replace... Go ahead.
I wanted to note real quick when both the Ummim and the Thummim and casting lots ended, at least in the ideas of the scholars. It is believed by the scholars that I have read that the Ummim and Thummim was discontinued after the Second Temple was erected.
Mm-hmm. As I was looking, I think you have an instance in Nehemiah, which probably would have been the latest instance of it there, yeah.
But again, that's just based off of the fact that they didn't hear much about it after that section. And then, as I think I mentioned before, the casting of lots in the sort of Protestant tradition, yes, they'll admit that the Matthias was chosen through casting lots, but they claim that it was discontinued as a viable option after the day of Pentecost, when the Holy Spirit was given.
Right.
Again, no scriptural, it's not explicit, but the day of Pentecost, the Holy Spirit, the indwelling of the Holy Spirit, is sort of used as of course, a turning point in human history, and so you can just say, oh yeah, no more dice, you don't need it.
Yeah.
You just let the Holy Spirit tell you what to do.
Yeah, a lot changed as far as, and especially when you're talking about, the priestly order and all of those things. I mean, all of that, done away with after, Jesus, the whole temple, destroyed and all of those things. So there was a major shift in the way that people commune with God and the way that they relate with God in our religious practices and all of those things. It was a huge, obviously, turning point, the death and resurrection of Jesus. So there's perhaps a precedent for people to say that's something that we should not participate in anymore. But I go back to when I'm thinking, I think that people still do ask for signs from God all the time. And I know plenty of people, very conservative evangelical Christians who pray and ask God for direction and ask him for signs through whichever way he might give them. And a lot of times people will go back to the Old Testament example of Gideon, and of laying out the fleece. And God, tells Gideon, this is what I want you to do. And, well, are you sure? If this is what you want me to do, then, and he does the thing with the fleece and he lays it out and let the ground be wet and let the fleece be dry. And then God does it. And then he, the next day says, well, would you just one more time, but this time do the opposite, let the fleece be wet and the ground be dry. And I might have got the order mixed up there, but that is a sort of practice where I have been, encouraged by people in the past to, lay out a fleece, pray to God and ask him for some kind of sign or confirmation. And these sorts of things happen. And of course, in order for it to be like some sign that I'm going to actually believe is from God, it has to be something that would be either some absurd, chance or possibility. The odds would have to be astronomical to where I would see it and say, there's no way this happened by chance, or it would have to be something entirely miraculous like you would see with Gideon. And people still practice those sorts of things, I think. I know that I have several times in my life, like when I had big decisions to make, I'm praying and asking God for signs. I'm asking for confirmations, and these confirmations I'm asking for in miraculous ways, and I have experienced this sort of thing in my life before. So I would not put it outside of the realm of possibility that it could, that God could manifest his purpose or his will for the life of a believer in something like, the casting of lots or, the flip of a coin or whatever. I think that God is definitely involved in all of those things one way or the other. For me personally, as I'm thinking about those, I can't envision many scenarios in my life when I'm going to say, all right, Lord, if you want me to do this, then it'll be an even number on the die. And if you want me to do this, it'll be an odd number. And I'm just going to throw it down there and just assume that he's going to do it.
It's an uncomfortable thing. That's a lack of faith, Chris.
Yeah. Yeah, if it was a prescription, that I felt was, still mandated for the believer today, then perhaps. But I think even more important than that is, and we were talking about this last night in class too, because we were talking about in systematic theology about the knowability of God, and if we are able to, if you're able to even know God, and we talk about Immanuel Kant and all of those different things and his idea about the fact that you can never actually know God, but it always comes up, the passage from 1 Corinthians 2. So he's talking about searching, the things of God, and in 1 Corinthians 2, starting in verse 6, he says, we do, however, speak a message of wisdom among the mature, but not the wisdom of the age or the rulers of the age who are coming to nothing. No, we declare God's wisdom, a mystery that has been hidden and that God destined for our glory before time began. None of the rulers of this age understood it, for if they had, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. However, it is written, what no eye has seen, what no ear has heard, and what no human mind has conceived, the things God has prepared for those who love him. These are the things God has revealed to us by his Spirit. And then he expounds on this point. The Spirit searches all things, even the deep things of God. For who knows a person's thoughts except their own spirit within them? In the same way, no one knows the thoughts of God except the Spirit of God. So basically what Paul is saying is nobody knows what another person is thinking except that person. And he says in the same way, nobody knows what God is thinking except for God. So, but then he says, what we have received is not the spirit of the world, but the Spirit who is from God, so that we may understand what God has freely given us. This is what we speak, not in words taught by human wisdom, but in words taught by the Spirit, explaining spiritual realities with Spirit-taught words. The person without the Spirit does not accept the things that come from the Spirit of God, but considers them foolishness and cannot understand them because they are discerned only through the Spirit. The person with the Spirit makes judgments about all things, but such a person is not subject to merely human judgments. For who has known the mind of the Lord so as to instruct him? And he's quoting there from Isaiah 40:13. But then his answer to that question is, but we have the mind of Christ. So what Paul is saying is we have actually access to the mind of God. We have access to the thoughts of God through the Spirit of God, that he has not left us without direction. He's not left us without some kind of voice, but he actually, as he indwells in our spirits, in our hearts, he then provides wisdom, direction, insight. He gives us those things if we're willing to press in, if we're willing to seek him on these things. I understand that there are times when we may be earnestly and honestly pressing in and seeking, and we just feel like we're hitting a wall and we're not really hearing anything. These are the times that I have been in my life. I don't really know what to do, God. I feel like you're not telling me what to do. I feel like I don't know what the right decision is. I'm praying. I'm fasting. I'm doing everything I can to seek you here, and I just feel like I'm getting nothing from you. I don't know what to do. Then you say, will you give me a sign? Will you give me some kind of sign? And then we kind of start asking God to show up and kind of manifest in miraculous ways that will, whether it's control my circumstances around me and close this door and open this one, and whatever terms people want to put it in, we all have some kind of way, I think, of divining, if you will, the will of God in our lives one way or the other. I don't know about where are you going with the casting of lots for believers today? Should we do it? I'm curious. I don't know how I feel about it.
No, I don't know how I feel about it either, but I did want to. So I don't know where I received this little ditty, this little piece of advice. It may have been from a person. It may have been from a piece of pop culture. I'm assuming I saw it in a movie or something. I have no idea. But I heard it a long time ago, and it really stuck with me. And I've used it before. And that is, so if anybody knows if this is like in a movie or something, let me know, because I would love to know where this came from. But the idea being that if you can't make a decision, you flip a coin. Not because the coin flip will give you the correct answer or the thing you should do, but that while the coin is floating in the air, in that Schrodinger's cat liminal state of complete randomness, and there's no way to tell how it's going to land, you listen to your heart, and your heart will tell you which side of the coin your heart wants it to land on. And that's the one you're supposed to go with. Not with what the coin lands on, but with what you hope the coin lands on when it does. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, it makes sense.
So I got that piece of it. So, I don't do it often. It's not a thing that I do often, but occasionally I'm having trouble figuring out where I want to eat lunch. Am I going to eat another? Oh, my, can I possibly eat another meatball sub? I mean, it's going to be like the third one this week. Or shall I go to the salad bar and make good choices? And then I take out a coin and I say, time to let the Lord decide. And you flip that coin, and while it's spinning in the air in sort of an eternal floating anticipation, my heart will cry out, meatball sub, and then it will land. And even if it says go to the salad bar, I'll know that deep in my heart, I need to go get the meatball sub again.
Where do you
Yeah,
get your
so
meatball subs from? I'm curious now.
Meatball Sub
That is
Emporium.
not true. That is not.
That
You made
is a
that
real
up.
place.
No, it's not.
A real place. It's delicious, and you should go
It
there.
is not either.
Yeah. So I bring that up to say, just to go into a short segment here on the second half, to go into a concept that I'm seeing happen in popular culture today, that I think this conversation about casting lots in the Bible has a lot to do with. And in this world where Christians are needing to constantly, think critically about what popular culture is presenting, where oftentimes the idea is that just don't listen to it whatsoever, which is generally good advice, by the way. It's just don't bother. You feel free to not bother with anything going on in pop culture. But if you are in a position where you're needing to interact with trends and forces in the world, I thought that this was had an interesting connection, and that is with the fact that TikTok exists. Have you heard about TikTok, Christopher?
I do know about it. I know about it. I
TikTok,
don't engage
all
with
the
it
kids,
much.
all the kids be talking about TikTok all the time. Careers are made and destroyed on TikTok. Popularity contests are won and lost on TikTok. And I also don't have TikTok. I don't want to send the Chinese all my information, but I do pay attention to what these sort of trends are that are being reported about and on TikTok. And one of the things that has become incredibly popular on TikTok and just in sort of pop culture altogether is tarot cards. And tarot cards, obviously, are firmly in the little box of occult to be hurled into the ocean. Okay? And let me soothe everybody's fears now. I am not going to be making a case that Christians should use tarot cards. In fact, there are Christians who have sort of adapted tarot cards to a more Christian milieu, and they use them as, they claim to use them as sort of evangelism tools, where they will have like their Jesus cards, and then they'll go to like a New Age festival or something and put up a booth, or go to Burning Man or something and invite people to come get their cards read. But no, they're not tarot cards, they're Jesus cards. And then hopefully that somehow entices them into Christianity.
Fascinating.
I have no data on whether that works or not, but it is certainly frowned upon by much of the Christian community. But this tarot card phenomenon is pretty real. Have you seen this? Are you aware of the trend, or how much do I need to explain to you?
For the witch talk thing, are you talking about? TikTok witch?
Yeah,
TikTok witch talk?
So it's a part of witch talk.
Yeah.
Witch talk is just a series of trends on TikTok where a lot of young people are getting into witchcraft through TikTok accounts.
Yeah, I mean, I did my PhD in New Orleans, and you can go.
Oh yeah, you're right
downtown. Yeah, to Jackson Square, and every night, during the day they have art dealers and musicians there, and then they pack up as the sun goes down, and then the tarot card readers show up, and they're there, all the time. So I used to go every weekend and get a tarot reading. Down in Jackson.
Bad boy.
I'm kidding. I didn't do it. I didn't do it. We did go down a time or two, and I spent some time talking to some of the tarot readers. And it is very people had mentioned it. It's a very spiritually heavy place, New Orleans, and especially you get down there.
Is that down there in the French Quarter?
In the French Quarter, yeah.
Yeah.
You get down into Jackson Square.
I've only been there once.
Yeah, and the first time I went there, I was touring the school, and they took us down there to kind of show us the city and everything, and it was you could feel it. It almost felt like something kind of crawled up your spine down there, and there was a particular occasion when I was walking around, and just kind of praying and walking around downtown, and there was it was one of those the voodoo stores, the witchcraft stores. They're all over the place, and I kind of just got this. I just kind of got this like. I was feeling.
Got the heebie-jeebies?
No, I was feeling more like feisty. I was feeling like very like, empowered in the spirit. I was walking very closely with the Lord, and it just really felt. I was like, I'm gonna go in there, and I'm just gonna see if there's anything to this. If it's just like a tourist trap thing, or if this is very real. If it's just like here's a magnet with a pentagram that says New Orleans on it, or whatever. Or if there's like anything going on here. And I was kind of curious, but I also didn't really, I didn't want to expose myself to anything crazy. So I was praying, and I was just like, well, Lord, I was like, I'm going to go in there. I'm going to pray for some stuff, and I'm just going to see. And I stepped foot through the front door there, and as I remember, I stepped foot over the threshold of that store, and it faced directly to the counter, and the woman who was behind the counter just looked like right up at me, and just had this like piercing, like sort of like stare. And I don't know if it's just a thing that she does to everybody when they walked in, but it felt like almost like contentious. And I kind of was just like, hi, and I felt covered in the spirit. I felt protected. I felt totally fine. And I just started walking around, looking at some of the stuff, praying over it, and asking God to, whatever, do whatever he could do to, break any of the power that might be going on in there, or, prevent people from coming in, or any kinds of prayers like that. And I kind of walked around, but I got the very real sense that it was very real, and these witches are very real, and there's something about it that they're, where they turn it into. It was like I was talking about before with the magic 8-balls and the Ouija boards and stuff, where they just try to make it, it's just a fun thing. It's just a fun thing to do. And I'm assuming this is where you're kind of taking this with the TikTok kind of phenomenon, is it's being turned into like a game or something.
Well, there's some interesting things going on. So there's certainly a more traditional vein that people, have sort of a supernatural view of what the tarot cards are, and will use it for, telling the future or directing their lives or whatever. Sort of the traditional tarot card. You go to a tarot card reader, what you're looking for. You're looking for the psychic experience or the occult experience, the supernatural. You want the spirits to tell you what to do or tell you what's going to happen, that kind of thing, right? But there's also a movement, a very large movement. Now, one of the reasons why this was on my mind was we recently read an article on one of my other podcasts, Canary Cry News Talk, and interestingly enough, another podcast did a review of our podcast and used that episode. And it was fun. I loved it. It was a weird experience hearing somebody on a podcast talk about my podcast. And they had a lot of nice things to say. These were mostly not Christian dudes doing the podcast. There's one Christian guy, I believe. But we covered an article on tarot cards. And one of the fellas just really got triggered at what I'm about to tell you about. And that was that a huge portion of the sort of popular tarot card crowd nowadays do not see them as supernatural. They do not see them as a supernatural connection to spirits or any sort of, anything supernatural whatsoever. In fact, they use them more as like a self-help tool. And they'll use that term, self-help. And there's all sorts of blog posts and articles and videos and podcasts about people talking about really how devoted they are to their tarot card practice, but how they don't believe in anything supernatural about them. Now, this is not me saying this. This is, tarot card influencers saying this. And this guy on this podcast got very mad because he's, he does believe very much in the supernatural connection to tarot cards. And he was kind of insisting that I, sort of semi-popular Christian podcaster did not believe in the supernatural elements of tarot cards. But that wasn't the point. The point was that this popular uprising of tarot card users, it's very connected with the self-help, treat yourself, self-care scene, where instead of, letting some sort of spirituality flow through the card, it's seen as, an opportunity for inner work or, exploring your inner world and initiating, thinking about different parts of your life that maybe you don't think about too much. You pull a card and you look at it and how does it apply to you and how does it make you feel and where in your life can you blah, 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 this sort of thing. And I thought it was an interesting connection with the casting lots, because certainly there's an aspect to casting lots that is simply just a fun way to find a random number. I would say very few people in the world today consider throwing dice a sort of divine question to be answered, or a divine petition for finding the will of God. And I thought it was a very interesting parallel with this, traditionally very occult practice of tarot card reading, finding a very strong niche in a population that simply sees it as an opportunity for self-growth. And, does that trigger anything in you, I suppose? Any thoughts?
Yeah, I do have some thoughts. I mean, I guess it makes me think of the old slippery slope thing. I've had some friends who actually are, do tarot sort of readings and things like that, and have offered it to me, and I'm like, no, I'm good. I'm good. Yeah. And I asked them about it, and I said, do you believe that there's, anything to it? Do you do it just because? And they said, oh, it's just fun. And I said, oh, well, it's just fun. Why do it if there's nothing,
Video games are fun. Why don't you play some video games?
Yeah. But the fact of the matter is that I think that there is, an element of you find yourself wanting there to be something more than what is at the surface. And I think that's kind of a human condition, that we all sort of have this desire for there to be something more about life, something deeper, a spiritual element, all of those things. And I mean, I'm sure there's a small cross-section of people who don't think about that and don't want anything like that. But I think most people, there is an innate desire, a God-given desire for us to see beyond kind of just the physical world. And even when you're coming to something that has such spiritual ties as tarot cards or as any other type of, divination devices, Ouija boards and things like that, and saying, oh, it's just gonna be for fun, and I'm just gonna use it for, some kind of self-help. There are things, tied to those. Those are avenues by which spirits and demons and the forces of darkness have for a long time kind of manifest themselves, made themselves known, communed with people in all of these different ways. And it just makes me think that's not a thing that you can take lightly. It's kind of C.S. Lewis had, he had the quote about Christianity, and he said, the Christianity, if it's not real, then it's of, no consequence whatsoever. But if it is real, it's of eternal consequence. Something
right
something to that regard. And that's the same way that I think
It's the
about
Pascal's wager.
Yeah, essentially. He said it more eloquently, and I might have butchered it, but I'm not going to look it up right now. But it makes me think about that with these sorts of things. It's like it's either fake and there's nothing to it, but I don't believe that it's fake and there's nothing to it. And if it is, and if that's what you believe, if you believe that it is fake and there's nothing to it, then why even mess with it? And if you don't believe that there's nothing to it whatsoever, then there is something to it, and it's more of a something than I think that you're even thinking that it is. And for me, wow. I just don't like it's one of those, like you said, you put it in the box and you throw it over the ship, and that's like I'm perfectly content with that in my life. God has not called me to any kind of ministry to deal specifically with that. There are lots of guys and gals out there who have come out of that, who know the terrain very well and who know the pitfalls and the dangers. And perhaps we could get one of them on to talk, Bancars or one of those guys to talk about those sorts of things. And if, there's casual usages of it, but I'm almost certain all of those people I've ever heard talk about that stuff are the ones who, even more than, your Aunt Sally, who's, grown up in a staunch conservative church, like the people who have actually messed with those sorts of things are even more like standoffish about them now. They're like, you should not know. It's nothing to be taken lightly. It's nothing to just kind of mess around with. You should stay far, far away from it. And I guess that's what I was thinking as you were saying, people are using it for self-help and they're not really trying to, commune with spirits or get any kind of, insight from another world about their life. They're using it as a tool. And it's like, well, there's lots of tools that you can use that don't have to be, tarot cards.
So, Christopher, you've fallen into my very expertly laid trap.
Oh, boy. Okay.
Dun, dun, dun. So, if we follow what you're saying about tarot cards, which is, traditionally very supernaturally connected to, this is the side of things that we would like to avoid being connected to as far as supernaturally. Well, with casting of lots, traditionally and historically, being connected to earnest searches for the will of God in a decision, now you say playing around with tarot cards with a non-supernatural worldview, you might as well just forget about it. Don't even think about it, because there's a very good chance that it will make that supernatural connection. Well, with casting lots to make a decision, which has centuries of history of connecting priests and disciples directly with the will of God, then if you are to casually be casting lots to try to make a decision, are you at similar risk to connecting directly with the will of God? Booyah, folks. That's how you take down a good friend and a doctor in
Did you take me down?
Interpretation.
I have a perfectly good answer for this, I think.
Yeah, right.
It's a good
You can try it.
Oh my gosh. It's a good consideration. It was a great point. And as you were making it, I was thinking, oh yes, very well. A nice trap, I guess, if you will.
Smarter than he looks.
But I think if I understand the question correctly, and you did a good job, but just let me make sure I understand it correctly. Mm-hmm. If the assertion I made was these things can be dangerous and there's something very real to them, so we shouldn't toy around with them about serious things or even trivial things, right? That's the point that I was making. You said, haha, yes. Now, how does that apply on the other side, right? So when we're looking at...
Well, the point is, even if you're not doing it with an intention of supernaturality,
right.
But it still may have that connection with supernaturality, how would casting lots be any different?
Yeah. So I don't know that you could necessarily say that it was, and I don't cast lots. I don't don't practice that. So like I don't know, man.
Could someone just simply rolling dice be, even without a supernatural intention, be connecting directly with the will of God being displayed right in front of them?
Well, I think that they could, and I am going to be the one. I will, if I get all the way, to where I'm going to be cornered on the issue. I'm going to say that even when you're playing Catan or Monopoly and you roll the die, that die roll is determined by the Lord. You might think it's trivial. You might think it doesn't. Why would God be concerned about the die roll in a Monopoly game? But it's more or less one of those things where I'm kind of like, I think he's intimately concerned with every area of our lives, and he's infinitely powerful and infinitely wise, and he cannot exhaust himself. He could control every aspect of every single detail of the entire universe, which he may very well do. I think that he does, and it's no expenditure of his power at all because it's infinite. So it doesn't take him anything. It's no sweat off of his brow, skin off of his back to do these things. I think that he does. I don't know if you could make a direct one-to-one corollary between, casting of lots and rolling die, quite as you might make between casually using tarot cards and using them to actually divine, a message for guidance in your life. I'm not.
Why not?
Yes, I was going to say, I don't know that I have a good explanation just yet for it. But I think that there is something. It's kind of like, I guess let's just talk about it. I'm thinking through this right now, so I'm not making any real claims.
I mean, the whole gotcha thing was more of a joke. I'm not trying to corny you.
No, it's fine, and I don't feel.
This is the cycle of difficulty.
Yeah.
That has come with my lifelong journey of trying to figure out if casting lots is a thing. And the second half of that is when I referred to my strategy in flipping a coin, where while the coin is in the air, my heart will tell me what I want it to land on. And if it lands on something I don't want and I still choose what my heart was telling me, is that willful disobedience to the will of the Lord? Christopher, this is very important to my life.
Yeah.
Do I listen to the coin or not?
Well, and this is, so when you initially asked the question, before I started thinking about, triviality being tied to something greater, like, God's will, my what I initially thought was, when I am seeking for the Lord's will in matters that are actually important, I'm doing that through prayer. I'm doing that through reading the Word. I'm doing that through trying to commune with God, trying to gain full access to His mind through the Spirit, that He might give me guidance and direction in what I'm supposed to do. So that is my first. That is always first where I'm going and trying to make decisions on things that I consider to be important. On matters where, where are we going to eat? And of course, everybody knows if you're in, any kind of romantic relationship, dating, married, otherwise, even just hanging out with friends, and, where do you want to go to eat? I don't know. Where do you want to go to eat? I don't know. They have apps, with like, you can use the app, where are we going to eat app, and you spin a little wheel, and, presumably it comes up to chance, and there it is, and that's where we're going. And it's like, does God control the app? Does God control the coin? Does it matter, where we're going to eat? I think there are ways that we categorize, just as we categorize our matters of theology, and these ones that are important and less important are dogmas, doctrines, and beliefs. In the same way, there are matters in our lives where it's, there's going to be some things that I'm going to hold with an open hand and just say, I don't really care, In those instances, I'm perfectly content with leaving things up to chance, or to just say, I'm driving down the highway and okay, the next sign we see, that's where we're stopping. On long road trips where we're eating, I don't know. Okay, we're getting off at the next exit and we're going to pick one of the places. Seems like it's by chance, but we came to that decision at a particular time, a particular place in the road, whatever. It's, man, I don't know.
But what if the decision is about whether or not your tribe is going to go to war,
well,
Chris?
Then I would...
It's not all about restaurants.
Yes, then I would consult with the Word of God, and I would see what are His instructions for how we are to make decisions here. I believe that the example that has been given to us in the New Testament is that we have access to the mind of God through the Holy Spirit, and that He will give us wisdom and guidance and direction. He will, intervene in our lives to show us what we ought to say, what we ought to do, where we ought to go, those sorts of things. There are times, as I said earlier, where I feel like I'm getting closer and closer to, it's time to make a decision about this thing, and I don't know what to do. God, I'm going to need a little more help. Could you please help me through? And then you just kind of, I don't know. Sometimes I have felt like I've done these things, asked for signs, and I felt like I've got them, and hey, yeah, wow, this turned out incredibly. And then other times I felt like I've gotten signs, and then I get to the place and it's like, oh, wow, this didn't quite turn out how I would expect. But also, who's to say that either one of those is or is not the will of the Lord? Just because I'm happy with the result doesn't mean it was God's will. And just because I'm unhappy with it doesn't mean that it's God's will. And ultimately, I think if we're doing the very best that we can as believers to stay in fellowship with Him, then we find ourselves continually at the center of His will, no matter what we're doing. And the thing that I would say really that we haven't gotten into, and I wonder more about myself, is not, and this is not for decision making, but we had talked about it in previous episodes, bibliomancy, where you just kind of like, I need a word, God, and you just open up the Bible to a random page, and then you're just like expecting God to speak to you through this verse. And sometimes people have had very profound and strange experiences, where I had one of my professors when I was doing my master's, and said that he had an experience like that, an occasion like that, and it was miraculous and profound, and I don't remember what he was laboring over, and I don't remember what the verse was, but he said it just was like, a bolt of lightning, like this, holy cow, the Lord spoke to me through this thing. It happens. I think that the Lord can, speak to you through coin flips and things like that. But most of the things, and even as we were talking about in the Christmas episode about receiving, rejecting, or redeeming, there's a certain element about the condition of your heart when you are moving into these things. And if you are earnestly and honestly seeking the will of the Lord, and if you have been doing everything to pray and to read the Word and to find guidance, and you feel like you haven't gotten there, and you are earnestly, God, I don't know what to do, and you have some form of lot casting system, whatever that might be, the roll of the die or the flip of a coin, and if the Lord is moving you to leave the result of a decision up to one of those types of methods, and you just feel completely stumped, like I don't know what to do in this situation, and I've done everything, and I have to make the choice now, and you haven't told me, and I'm trusting that you're going to be in this, and it's up to a flip of a coin right now, and you decide to do that, I think that the Lord will be in it. Whatever happens, He's going to be with you. He's going to walk with you. He's going to be with you. I kind of like what you had talked about, where when the coin's in the air and it's spinning, that your heart is kind of telling you what you want. But I don't know if that always is the case for anybody. I think that sometimes we can be so conflicted about stuff that we don't even really know what is the right thing to do. So I don't know, man. I guess you stumped me. Like, I don't know. Not that you were trying to, but it is. I don't know that that I have a really great answer beyond, the kind of just you got to just seek the Lord and pray and spend time in his presence, spend time in his word. And he has never, for me personally, brought me to a place in my life where I had to make a decision and I didn't feel like by the time that decision had to be made that he wasn't giving me some kind of clear direction. There have been times in my life when I've made decisions and I've been apart from the Lord. And actually, sometimes even in those instances, you feel him being like, this is a bad choice. Don't do this. Don't go here. Don't get involved with this, and you still kind of persist. But I think that is one of the things that kind of characterizes being a child of God. However, the times when I have been walking most closely with the Lord, when I have big decisions, and that always is a way that he draws me in. I think it's a way that he draws most people in. You have this big decision to make. Okay, it's coming up in a month. This next month, you're going to be praying a lot more, I bet. We're going to be talking a lot more. You're going to be pressing in a lot more. And he's always been faithful to me. So, are you messing with sacred things in flipping a coin to decide where to go to lunch? I feel okay. I feel okay about it. I don't know. I don't know, man. I don't know. My brain hurts now.
There was a point in there that I was going to say, you've done it. You've solved my riddle, Christopher.
Well, what was
and then you lost.
What was the answer that I missed? Tell me.
You lost.
Because I didn't think it was there.
You lost confidence, and then I win again.
Oh, wow. You're a sorcerer now.
That's very, but see, now you understand the struggle that I've been living with for pretty much my entire life. Are we allowed to flip a coin to better deliberate on what we should do to serve the Lord? Yeah, well, oh man, I had so many things. I was very interested in what you were going to say. I had a list of things that I was thinking about responding to, but I've lost it now. But now you understand. It ain't so easy. I think the safe. If we're going to taking the safe route, nothing wrong with flipping coins. But that's what I was thinking. Okay, so I mentioned the tarot fellow who did not like me talking about tarot because I'm not a practitioner. And, I, too, have some friends who use tarot cards in this tool-like fashion, Mm-hmm. And they are very aware of my spiritual existence. And, I can't remember exactly how the conversation went, but at some point, they've either asked if I was interested or asked if I had a problem with it or something like that. And because I know that they're not necessarily supernatural occult people, and they were more using it as this fun, trendy, like self-help tool. But they do still have sort of like a spiritual mind to them. I mean, I don't think you use tarot cards as a self-help tool if you don't have some sort of spiritual, supernatural bent to you. And I just, you know me, Christopher. Sometimes I just don't want to get into the whole thing, especially if it's with, depending on the situation, or with people that, like, I'm not trying to get into a huge argument
Sure.
and sort of alienate them into, telling them they're going to hell or something for doing something in their life. Sometimes there's a time for that. It's not every time. That's a piece of advice that has served me very well in life. But when they are spiritually minded people and they are talking about stuff like that, my general response is, I don't really need tools like that to commune with the divine, or, I'll try to use whatever language they're most comfortable with. But, I don't really need that. I have other ways of connecting with God. I have less involved sort of physical, I don't need this Ouija board from Hasbro. I don't need Hasbro getting between me and God or my supernatural beliefs. That I have my own personal connection with that, and that actually tends to get a very good response, because it's way cooler. If somebody's thinking that they're a cool spiritual person because they do tarot cards, when you let them know you have a direct connection with the creator of the universe, and you don't need to use some sort of corporately manufactured product to experience the supernatural, that tends to put the conversation in a much better light than simply telling them they're doing the devil's work.
Yeah. There are many angles in talking with people about those sorts of things, but usually, the times that I have talked to tarot card readers and have gone down there and talked to some of the psychics, I had a very interesting encounter with one of the guys down there in New Orleans in Jackson Square, and he said that he just got in. I asked him where he was from. He said he just got in from Aruba this morning, and I said, "Oh, you flew in?" He said, "No." He said, I came through a portal." And he was like, he was being completely serious, and I was like, "Whoa, okay." I said, "You travel through portals, huh?" And he said, "Yeah." And he kind of told me about it, and he was, it was very bizarre. But as I'm talking with these kinds of people and with him, I said, "You believe this stuff is real? Then you believe what you're doing is real, right? Like, there's something to this." And they said, "Well, yes, of course." And then I just started to ask, like, is there a possibility that the spirits that you're consorting with might not be, benevolent? That they might not actually be kind,
Have your best interests in mind.
And especially, because I believe that, obviously I believe that the spiritual realm is real, and I believe that tarot cards are real, and fortune telling is real, and that these people are actually communicating with spirits in most instances. And I think that most of them have had supernatural experiences. And it's a really great opportunity to just say, that the spiritual realm is real because you've experienced it. Let me tell you, as you just said, about, this side of it. And not that most of them are usually familiar with who Jesus is and who Christians are, but they're very open, at least to having that discussion, because they live in that world as much as a Christian lives in the spiritual world, or should live in the spiritual world. So they do. So it's actually usually really, really fun conversations, so long as they're not, nefarious in every one of their intentions in the conversation. But yeah.
Right. Fun. All right. Well, I think we solved all those problems.
I don't know, man. What are you gonna do from now on when you don't know if it's a meatball sub or a salad?
I'll probably still just keep getting the meatball sub.
Yeah.
I need the protein.
Yeah? Okay. Well.
Yeah. Getting big and strong.
Praise the Lord. Praise the Lord for that. I'm trying to go for more salads in 2022.
Oh, okay. Well, you can have all my salads. When I flip the coin and it lands on salad, It'll text be for me. To you so you know it's time. You must be mistaken, coin. Sorry, that's for Chris.
Oh, please do it. Yeah, I'll count it as a word from God.
There you go. If it's heads, it's for me. If it's tails, that's for Chris.
Might be sitting down for a Philly cheesesteak and get a text. Time for your salad.
Time for your salad, buddy. We'll keep you on track.
Yeah. Well, this was fascinating. Thank you for bringing this up. I'm going to be, as I say often, I never claim to have all of the answers, and here is one example where this is a very interesting topic to consider and discuss. So thank you for bringing this one to the table. I'm going to be looking at it more. We'll have to revisit it at some point. And actually, I would like to this would be one I'd love to get an expert in to talk about. So we'll have to come back to this one again.
They need to be an expert who's who's adequately open to having the twisty-turny conversation, though. Because, yes, it is literally impossible to find anybody in some sort of, Christian authority who would really even, entertain the different possibilities that we've explored here today.
Yeah.
And usually, a lot of times that's just because, you gotta hold the line. Gotta hold the line against those satanic coin flippers.
Oh boy. There it is. It's all come full circle now.
Yeah. All right. Okay. Well, thank you, everybody, for listening to this episode of Ravel. Thank you for everybody who's been leaving ratings and reviews. We love them. Yes, of course, coming up soon, not too soon, but coming up soon, we'll be doing another Asked and Not Answered episode. So if you have any questions or ideas that you would like Chris and I to explore live on the show, live to tape at least, let us know. Send them in. You can email us at our email. You can just send it to our Instagram or our Twitter, whatever. Where else on the internet could you ask a question and be joyful at the fact that you don't get a firm answer? Nowhere else, folks. It's the only place.
We're gonna have to make the next one. It's gonna have to be kind of long. We got questions piling up here. We're gonna have to get through several of them.
Yeah, we can do that. Don't tell them that we have too many questions. You're gonna
not to discourage anyone.
You're gonna discourage somebody from sending.
But
in
there,
questions.
I just know that we have.
We keep a catalog.
Yeah.
We have a whole catalog of questions. So always send yours in, because sometimes people ask similar questions, but maybe yours has a different angle or a different, data point that we need to consider that we wouldn't have considered without it.
Yeah.
So send in your questions, send in your comments, leave ratings and reviews. It really helps us out. Any last words, Chris?
Godspeed.
Thanks for listening to Ravel. To learn more about who we are, what we believe, or how to support this ministry, visit our website at ravelpodcast.com. If you have a question you would like answered on the show, or to let us know how we're doing, email us at contact@ravelpodcast.com. This project is made possible by the prayers and generosity of listeners just like you.
Craziest mouth sounds the past 5 minutes. Are you okay?